In this video, we're going to look at a very old subject, but in a way that most of you have never seen it before. This is about a piece of evidence that's commonly called the magic bullet. What I will prove to you in this video is that that particular bullet was never fired at President Kennedy or Governor Connally. To understand what happened, I would urge you to watch the entire video. Some of the most important evidence will come at the end of part 2. One of the most controversial aspects of the JFK assassination has been Warren Commission Exhibit CE 399. That was the bullet that was claimed to have passed through President Kennedy and then Governor Connally, inflicting 7 wounds and finally falling out from Governor Connally's left thigh. Warren Commission critics have always been skeptical of the single bullet theory because the bullet exhibited very little damage. And in fact, when the grooves of the bullet were examined microscopically, there was no trace of human blood or tissue. The FBI told the Warren Commission that CE 399 was found on Governor Connally's stretcher by hospital orderly Darrell Tomlinson. Tomlinson did indeed find a bullet on a stretcher that day, but he has always been adamant that the stretcher he found it on was not Connally's.
Darrell Tomlinson, a Parkland Hospital employee, reenacts how he found that bullet on a stretcher. The bullet was ballistically traced to Oswald's rifle. The Warren Commission concluded that it was the bullet that had wounded both men and that it had fallen out of Connally's clothing onto his hospital stretcher.
The bullet was found here in this area, and not on that stretcher. That's the stretcher I took off the elevator.
The stretcher he took off the elevator was Connally's, so Tomlinson found the bullet on a different stretcher not connected to the case. This led critics to claim the bullet was planted, but the commission decided Tomlinson was mistaken.
It was there when I came up.
So if Tomlinson was correct, then the bullet he found probably came from a patient who had nothing at all to do with the assassination. After discovering the bullet, Tomlinson brought it to his supervisor, Mr. O.P. Wright. Wright passed the bullet on to Secret Service agent Richard Johnson. Johnson then passed it on to his supervisor, Chief James Rowley, who then gave it to the FBI. The FBI sent the bullet off to their labs and then presented CE 399 to the Warren Commission. But after Tomlinson had testified that the bullet came from a different stretcher, the Commission started to get maybe a little bit suspicious. And they told the FBI to go back and get confirmation from the witnesses who had examined the original bullet. And that's when the trouble began. They showed the bullet to Secret Service agent Richard E. Johnson, but Johnson said he could not identify the bullet as the same one he received from O.P. Wright. And then they showed it to Johnson's supervisor, James Rowley, who also said he could not confirm that it was the same bullet. The FBI had exactly the same problem with the 2 civilians. In an airtel dated 6/20 of 1964, stated, neither Darrell C. Tomlinson, who found the bullet at Parkland Hospital, Dallas, nor O.P. Wright, personnel officer, Parkland Hospital, who obtained the bullet from Tomlinson and gave to Special Service at Dallas 11/22/63, can identify the bullet. The airtel, by the way, was top secret. It was never shown to the Warren Commission. Instead, they told the Warren Commission a different story. They said that FBI agent Bardwell D. Odom interviewed Tomlinson and Wright, and that although they refused to officially confirm CE 399, Tomlinson said it appears to be the one he found on a stretcher. And that O.P. Wright said it looked like the same bullet. But when Hosea Thompson interviewed Tomlinson and Wright, both men stated that the original bullet was much different than CE 399 and had a much more pointed tip. In fact, Wright, who was an ex-police officer, pulled a bullet from his desk drawer and showed it to Thompson, stating that the stretcher bullet was similar to that. This is a photo of that bullet from Thompson's book, 6 Seconds in Dallas. So, is it possible the 2 men just changed their minds between 1964 and 1967 when Thompson interviewed them? Well, according to the best evidence we have now, that interview with the FBI never took place, and the two men never claimed that CE-399 was similar to the original bullet. But when Hosea Thompson and Dr. Gary Aguilar tried to locate that report, it was nowhere to be found. They contacted the ARB, which was active then, as well as the National Archives. Both of them carried out thorough searches but could not find it. In fact, Mr. Stuart Cully, an archivist at the National Archives, also informed them that the numbers on the FBI documents ran concurrently with no gaps, which indicated there were no reports missing from the files. So that report was not lost. It never existed to begin with. But Thompson and Aguilar would not give up. Finally, they contacted then-retired agent Bardwell Odom, whom the FBI claimed had conducted the interview, and asked him about it. His reply was, "I didn't show it to anybody at Parkland. I didn't have any bullet. I don't think I ever saw it even." So what seems to have happened is that when the FBI discovered that the bullet that Tomlinson found did not come from Oswald's rifle, they switched it for one that did. So if the bullet found by Tomlinson was not the same one that came from Governor Connally's thigh, then what happened to the bullet that did? Well, fortunately, Governor Connally answered that question for us. This is from his autobiography entitled In History's Shadow. The most curious discovery of all took place when they rolled me off the stretcher and onto the examining table. A metal object fell to the floor with a click no louder than a wedding band. The nurse picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. It was the bullet from my body, the one that passed through my back, chest, and wrist and worked itself loose from my thigh. If Governor Connally was correct, that the bullet was retrieved by a nurse, then the bullet that fell from his thigh could not have been the same one that Tomlinson found. Connally's recollection was corroborated by the Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade. This is from an interview he gave to the Dallas Morning News on November 21st of 1993. I also went out to see Connally, but he was in the operating room. Some nurse had a bullet in her hand and said this was on the gurney that Connally was on. Question: what did you do with the bullet? Is this the famous pristine bullet people have talked about? I told her to give it to the police, which she said she would. I assume that's the pristine bullet. So what did the nurse do with the bullet after that? Well, the answer turned up in a search through the HSCA reports. They referenced an FBI report which stated that Texas Highway Patrolman Bobby M. Nolan was interviewed about a bullet fragment that was retrieved from the left thigh of Governor Connally and was turned over to him at Parkland Hospital. The medical panel of the House Select Committee concluded that Nolan was probably confused, and that he actually received a tiny fragment from the governor's wrist rather than from his leg. Of course, they pretty much had to say that because no doctor ever claimed to remove any fragments from the governor's leg. But I knew that Nurse Audrey Bell had passed the wrist fragments on to a plainclothes officer of the FBI. There's no way she was describing a Texas Highway Patrolman who would have been in full uniform at that time. Of course, my next thought was, rather than guess about what happened, why didn't the panel just pick up a phone and call Patrolman Nolan? And for that matter, why don't I?